One of the things for your viewers to understand is perhaps you're not going to do one ayahuasca journey and the rest of your life is transformed and your historical sense of self is gone and you've become glowing and shimmering and floating. In fact, many people are afraid of that. They're afraid that who they've been all of their lives will disappear and that this evolved human will show up and that they won't want that. I remember very distinctly as a college student saying, I don't want happiness. If I had happiness, I would probably end up, unfortunately, as a yoga instructor. I literally, this was conscious for me. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to outstrip my poverty. I wanted to be important, not feeling like I didn't deserve to be in the room. As a result, I was afraid of happiness as a pursuit.
Welcome to the Awakened Leader Podcast, transformative stories with plant medicine by One Heart. In each episode, we'll speak one-on-one with high-performing, heart-centered leaders and conscious creators. We'll go deep on how their lives have been transformed from their work with sacred psychedelic plant medicine within our unique One Heart container. You'll hear stories from CEOs, changemakers, and creatives on their experience. Learn how these moments have propelled them to elevate their life and the lives of those around them. Each guest has completed One Heart's 8-week Human Accelerator for Life Elevation program. The One Heart container brings together 40 amazing, heart-centered leaders for an epic 1-week transformational journey in Costa Rica, plus 7 weeks of virtual preparation and integration before and after. Our intention with this podcast is to plant a seed within your heart that we are all powerful, conscious creators capable of manifesting our most aligned lives filled with joy, fulfillment, and love. Our mission is to elevate the life, work, and community of heart-centered leaders by reminding them our truth, that I am you are me, we are one.
In this episode, I'm joined by Keith Ferrazzi from Journeys 2, 4, 6, 7, and 9. This is a special episode as Keith has been such a huge part of One Heart since the beginning and has shared so much in our evolution. Keith is a #1 New York Times bestselling author, speaker, entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, and executive team coach who helps executive teams harness radical adaptability and co-elevation to transform enterprises in an unpredictable work world. As founder and chairman of Ferrazzi Greenlight and its Go Forward to Work Applied Research Institute, he works with top organizations to maximize team performance and achieve transformative outcomes. With over 20 years of experience coaching C-suite executive teams, Keith is recognized as one of the world's most sought-after executive team coaches. He formerly served as CMO and head of sales at Deloitte and Starwood Hotels. I personally love this episode with Keith. Some things that I felt into deeply are exploring Keith's growth and expansion since our first journey together nearly 5 years ago, the huge impact Keith has had on the One Heart organization as one of our first and biggest supporters. Keith has personally taught me a lot about vulnerability and the courage to go to that place in situations where it does not feel comfortable. The ability is one of Keith's greatest gifts and why he's had such a profound impact on me, One Heart, and all those around him. And in this episode, we talk about Keith's humbling experience with psilocybin and how he worked his way to ayahuasca from there, what it means to be a seeker and a server, how we both continue to work with and through our challenging Type A tendencies, all the wraparound services One Heart offers, and how these support powerful healings and breakthroughs that complement our sacred plant medicine ceremonies, how One Heart gave Keith the family he'd been looking for, what self-love is and isn't, and how his relationship with this allowed him to attract his life partner. Keith even opens up about a story he's never shared publicly, and much more. And now, we bring you the #1 New York Times bestselling author and a dear friend of mine, Keith Ferrazzi. Well, welcome to Keith Ferrazzi. Super excited myself to have you on. One, because we just haven't caught up in a long time, and you've been such a integral part of One Heart, which we'll get into since coming as a guest on our second journey. And there's a lot of things that exist in One Heart now that would not have without you, and levels of vulnerability that you've helped us achieve. And so very grateful for you to be on and just to get to talk to you myself.
Me too, brother. Looking forward to this.
Awesome. And so I'd love to first touch on how you arrived on that first journey, maybe what was in your mind, how you ended up deciding to come. And I believe that was your first ayahuasca experience.
It was exciting.
Yeah. So maybe touch a little on that, what that felt like, and then we'll get into the experience on journey and post.
Maybe I'll take you back a little bit. First of all, it's not like many of us who have been on a path of exploration. I definitely consider myself a seeker. I know that I would have found ayahuasca at some point along the path, just because anything that scares me or grounds me or makes me feel like I could go higher through, I'll pursue. So would have found it anyway at some point. However, my journey kind of started a number of years ago. It was at least 8 years before my first ayahuasca journey. And it found me in a position where I was in a marriage and I was not honoring that marriage with integrity. And it wasn't the marriage that I felt was the love of my life. And I was not being the human that I wanted to be and even wrote about. And so I set down a path and a journey that took me through a number of things. The first thing it took me through was a very deep coaching and therapy. It took me into the 12 steps, into Al-Anon and other things, which were really powerful. And it was at that time that somebody mentioned to me plant medicine. And I heard about ayahuasca and I went to a shaman to explore it. And the shaman looked at me and said, "You're not ready," which I found wonderful. And I said, "What do you mean I'm not ready?" He goes, "No, I think the right medicine for you right now is psilocybin." And I said, no, I want the serious stuff. None of this psilocybin stuff. I want the serious stuff. Give me ayahuasca. Well, I did a psilocybin journey and found myself for 4 hours shaking and sweating in a ball. And I came out of that saying, you know what? I've got work to do. And I put ayahuasca off to the side for a bit. And I did a bit of work with a shaman in the realm of psilocybin for a number of years. And then I was in a different retreat that didn't have anything to do with plant medicine. And I met a young man named Tim Sekou. And Tim was a guest of, those of you who don't know, Tim's one of Brandon's partners in iHeart. And Tim was with, what's that?
One Heart.
One Heart. Sorry. iHeart happens to be a client of mine, iHeart. And I was just with Bob Pittman on the other line. So sorry about that. So Tim was a guest of a dear friend of mine, and we got to know each other, and we all three, Roy, Tim, and I, decided to do our first journey together. And it was just perfect. It was called to me with a couple of dear friends, but I was scared to death. Oh my God, I can't tell you how frightened I was. But by that time, I was still clinging and I really needed a psychological and emotional chiropractic adjustment. And I found that in that first journey, which I'm sure we'll talk about, the number of things that I awakened to in terms of past experiences, traumas, existing legacy behaviors. And imagine, Brandon, you and I always joke about who showed up in terms of where I was and who I was when I showed up that first time. By the way, that was after years of work.
Yeah.
So, Imagine who I was prior to awakening in Moscow, that I needed to make some shifts in my life.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I'll give a quick reflection. One of the things I remember prior to the journey was the majority of the questions were coming. I got a lot of questions from you and your assistant, and there was a lot of, I felt like, really trying to figure out and hang on to, what's going to happen. How can I control this experience? And we see that a lot. I can always tell when people are coming in that, a lot of the people we work with have a lot of control, have a lot of analytic ability, and are really trying to figure things out. So I'm curious, I remember you that way, and obviously I've got to experience you many other ways, and curious how you view that kind of coming in and how your way of being has shifted.
Yeah, I mean, off to my, I guess, that shoulder, there's a book there that I wrote, many people will know me from, called Never Eat Alone. And that book gave me the blessing of the opportunity to be a person of service in people's lives globally. And yet, if you read that book today, it clearly is somebody who is coming at the world with peripatetic energy that is constantly hustling, working, driving, etc. Now, in reality, it's a young man, and I even speak to it in the book. It's a young man who was trying to outrun the insecurity of his past.
Mhm.
And that's who you met. I mean, you met somebody trying to
Yeah.
outrun the insecurity of my past. And I didn't have another way of being
Yeah.
or feeling.
Maybe you can speak to a little bit about that, because I always find that impressive as far as your upbringing in Pittsburgh and in the amazing places you've gone from where that upbringing was. And obviously your sexuality is a big, often a big theme of that. I would love to hear how you kind of gain the comfort I know you have now.
The comfort I keep working on. This is a never ending journey, right? Brought up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, son of an unemployed steel worker. Mom was a cleaning lady who, by the way, just yesterday celebrated her 90th birthday.
Wow.
And I went and we celebrated. She organized it. I paid for it. And she had 100 people at her 90th birthday that she organized personally. And she's 100% sharp. And God bless and fingers crossed she'll continue to be so for decades. But it was a tough upbringing in that I had a lot of American poverty. I say American poverty because the human who I'm in love with today is extraordinary. And we had gone back and visited his homestead in Hong Kong. And I saw the bunk beds where he and his brother slept at the top bunk all throughout his high school experience, and the bottom bunk where his mother and father slept. And I realized when I say I was brought up in poverty, I've got to be a little humble about the extent of my poverty when I start to be exposed to international poverty. That said, it wasn't an easy upbringing, and there was a lot of anxiety. My sister, who was really a second mother to me, she was 13 years older. She left the house out of her own desire to get out of the anxiety that was there. A lot of tumult going on between my mother and father, and between my father, who was not my siblings' father. My father and their father is different. The bottom line is my sister got pregnant at 16 as her escape. And there was a wonderful story, which may be premature in this podcast to tell, but there was a wonderful story where it was after, I think, our first ayahuasca sit, and it was during breath work, which is one of the things I love about, Brandon, your work with One Heart, is that it's a continuation. It's not just the sit. It's not just the medicine. It's all what I call the wraparound services, which
you coined that term for us. We use that.
Yeah,
we use that a lot.
Which you and I spent a lot of time on some of them, and I'm just so impressed by the container that you hold, but and how it starts in advance and now continues afterward. But one piece of it is breath work. It's very powerful, and it was during breath work that I just felt this overwhelming anxiety and this overwhelming loss and and I was grieving and I was mourning. I was wailing, but I was screaming the words Nain, N-A-I-N, Nain, Nain. And I had no idea what those words were. They felt nonsensical. I found out later that at the age of 3, I couldn't pronounce Karen, my sister's name. And here I was thrown back through the work into my body of a 3-year-old, crying for my sister who has left the house and was my protector. And I had to discover that afterward. I mean, my journey taught me something that I didn't know consciously. And so that trauma was something that I've always run away from. And you alluded to it, being poor and then going to rich schools, which my parents made sure, God bless them, that they had a good education, but always feeling less than. And then waking up in blue collar Southwestern Pennsylvania and realizing I was gay. And I had no consciousness. This was back in an era when Liberace was straight. So, there was no role model out there. I'm not saying Liberace was a role model, but my point is we didn't have, Tim Cook. We didn't have presidential candidates like Pete to look to. Anything I wished I could have achieved was now washed away. And I had to live with that or live in shame. And that was another thing I have to say, that my journeys, more than anything else, I didn't realize it, but it's shame. Shame was one of the things. And I remember one of my subsequent journeys, I've been with you at least 21 sits, I think. And it was one of my subsequent later journeys where I realized that it was actually shame. It was a day journey. And I realized it was actually shame that was the last vestige of my past that I needed to shake off. And I literally got up because it was a day journey. You're afforded a little bit more liberal nature in your movement. And I went off to the side, and people must have thought I was dancing, or they thought what it was. But what it was I was literally shaking off the shame and I was imagining all of the things that I was still holding on to as shame in my life. And it was just such a cathartic and beautiful experience.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue. I mean, shame is the lowest vibration that we hold. And on the highest end of the vibrations is love. And you had a very big impact in some of the programming that we run now. I still remember on that second journey, we were finishing up a workshop, and I guess self-love had been brought up, and you raised your hand and you said, can anyone here who knows what self-love feels like, please raise your hand and stay after, because I have absolutely no idea and I would love to hear that. And I remember what a profound moment that was, because I mean, we have a lot of successful people come through One Heart. You're perhaps, the most impressive. There's not someone who has more achievements and more credibility in our world as it's defined than you do. And here you are asking what self-love feels like. And I think it's been an interesting thing for us to explore on our journeys, because what I've discovered is oftentimes these high performers have less self-love, or it's very much an issue because it's this lack of self-love that's driving us sometimes. We're trying to do the next thing so that we'll be accepted and so we'll be loved. And it was really just a powerful experience. I think about a third of the people raised their hands. So 2/3 did not, really know what self-love felt like. And I'd probably argue that the third that raised their hands didn't have the full grasp of it. And we stayed after and we spoke a bit about it. And since that time, we developed a workshop specifically around self-love that's become, one of the most powerful things we do, including the medicine, and has really given people, a window into what it feels like to be loved and to love themselves in every way. So my question to you would be, how did that feel before, lacking that lack or that emptiness that you felt there? And obviously, I think there's been a ton of healing, just my own observation, knowing how Kale and the love of your life came in. That generally happens when we find love within ourselves. So I'd just love to hear that journey, your journey of love.
Yeah. I mean, I just for those of you who are watching, I want to give you a peek into some of the things going on in my body right now as we're having this conversation. Brandon mentioned that exercise. And when I raised my hand and I said, hey, is there anybody here going to describe this thing for me? That wasn't a heart-centered moment. It was a vulnerable moment, but it was literally, I was curious. I was very intellectual. I was trying to figure out, what does it mean? Like, what do these words mean? Self-love. I'm just self-critical. I mean, that's where my head was. I'm self-critical to the point where I'm not sure I could really empathize with self-love. Now, but what was going on a moment ago, I just want to give you all a taste of it, was my eyes were welling up and my chest was getting tight and my throat clenched because I was remembering the workshop that Brandon was talking about, not for myself, but I was remembering the workshop for one of the people in the program who I feel very dearly toward. And I know you'll know who he is. Starts with a U.
We brought up Ulysses before. He's given us free reign. So yeah, that was. Can I add something there actually before you go in? I don't know if you're going to describe it. One of the interesting things is we often know like who need, you can kind of get a feel for who needs what. And I remember actually on the first journey, we did that exercise. Ulysses was not there. And my wife and I, we looked at each other and we were like, God, like he's the one person. I think he hadn't cried in his entire life or something. And we were like, he's the one person that needs to be here. And he actually came back on the next journey.
It was so powerful. Again, not to describe his journey for him, but I mean, he's a great CEO in his own right. What Uli did was he scared himself so strongly in that he felt something during this workshop that he had never felt before. Mm-hmm. And then the echo effects of having felt a sense of love and openness, and it cracked his heart open. And then he got frightened by it. And then he got frightened by that. And it just went into this beautiful wailing opening circle that I'm sure was probably one of the most transformative things that have ever happened to him. And again, some of these things don't happen in the medicine, right? Certainly the medicine is in us. There's no question.
Sure.
That's important. But the services and the emotional carry, and then the peer-to-peer support group that we create around you to make sure that you're held. And by the, what's, I would say one of the great things that ayahuasca is that it's the great peer-to-peer equalizer. It's the universal us. It's the one time when most of us come into the journey and we are very self-centered. We're very self-focused. And then Brandon, this are some things my team wanted to know, what my experience was going to be like, how I would be taken care of, which they normally do in the purview of managing somebody whose schedule is like mine, where I'm going in 5 different time zones in 5 days. And so they were doing their job, right? And with that, what began to happen that week is that it wasn't about me. It became about us. And, I even remember, allowing my own talents to come to bear and helping other people find us. Because that's what I do for a living, right? I mean, my primary responsibility in this world is to coach executive teams. And I remembered how I felt like here I was, where a lot of individuals were going through an individual journey. I said, wow, maybe we could start to co-create some things where there is more engineered togetherness, engineered elevation as a team. Even for you and your co-founder, right? I mean, like bringing all of that together. For me, I started not only through my own work, but through being of service, found the universal us. And that was so powerful. I mean, I know, look, it's very ingrained. And one of the things for your viewers to understand is, you're not going to do one ayahuasca journey and the rest of your life is transformed and your historical sense of self is gone and you've become glowing and shimmering and floating. In fact, many people are afraid of that. They're afraid that who they've been all of their lives will be disappeared and that this evolved human will show up and that they won't want that. I remember very distinctly as a college student saying, I don't want happiness. If I had happiness, I would probably end up, unfortunately, as a yoga instructor. I literally, this was a conscious, was a conscious for me. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to outstrip my poverty. I wanted to be important, not feeling like I didn't deserve to be in the room. As a result, I was afraid of happiness as a pursuit. Yeah. That sounds crazy for most evolved humans, but hopefully some of your viewers will understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, that tailors back. I mean, I want to get back to the self-love just a little bit more, dig in there on your personal experience. But I think, there's this idea that we have this predisposition, I think most of us, to play small, which is interesting. And we find, this safety, and there's this whole world available to us. There is this happiness available to us. And so many of us are scared to go after that happiness. And I think that's a very common theme. I think that ties into self-love, or my vision of what self-love truly is. But I'd love to, I know when you came in, a lot of the conversations we had, I remember just wanting you to find that special man. And we had a lot of conversations about relationship, and just saw your intentions were so beautiful there. And it felt very foreign and difficult to think about how that would come in early on. And not that self-love requires you to find that person, but I have seen you and how the self-love in you has attracted that person. And I would just love to hear a little bit more again, how that self-love has developed and what it feels like now, because you didn't have that. You didn't understand it before. Explain it to those that don't understand it now.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for that request, because I'm not sure that I've done it. So maybe let me muddle through it a bit. So if somebody had asked me, as I did, who understands self-love, raise your hand. And if I were to be so bold to raise my hand today, by the way, I believe that I understand it. I don't know that I've fully actualized it. I'm still working on it. But I'll tell you this, maybe it's partially it's what the absence of it is, meaning the absence of self-love is the constant critical voice that's going on in your head that you're not good enough, that you're not worthy. I mean, I remember growing up during the AIDS epidemic, and I was not fully out yet, and I wasn't particularly sexually active at the time. I certainly had emotions and feelings, and I would go to church every Sunday and I would pray that God would take these away from me, because of course I was taught that God did not appreciate these feelings. And, you know, I just kept asking God, why would you give me these feelings if in fact I wasn't supposed to have them? And I just pray that they would be taken away. And I really felt that, I mean, I'm going to say something I don't know that I've ever said in public, but I bought into the rhetoric that many of the religious right bought into about AIDS, that at that time, that if I had contracted HIV, that I would have deserved it. And that's probably the penultimate of self-love, that you are so unworthy and that your deeds and who you are at your core was worthy of punishment from some sense of divinity. And I mean, that's probably the opposite end of the extreme to self-love, versus to appreciate and love yourself for your eccentricities and your frailties and your authenticity, and to be on a pursuit of knowing that God made you in such a perfect light. And the key that the analogy I've used is that I was born into this world, so as every child is, as this beautiful shining entity. And just so many things have been put on top of that entity to, you know, and the key is to uncover that beautiful shining orb, you know, that beautiful shining child. And that's been this work. And the act of it is self-love. Look, part of the issue is doing the fucking hard work. And that's so much of what self-love is, the willingness to do the damn work and show up. And one of the things that I've always done is I'm going to use profanity because of my Pittsburgh roots, but also to make the point, I have always showed up like a motherfucker. I show up.
Yeah.
And that was never easy. And it never is. I was just talking to a woman the other day who's really blocked. She's one of the most beautiful souls. I've just introduced her to Tim. She's one of the most beautiful souls, and she hasn't found love in her life. She's found the wrong people, as I had. And by the way, I want to say, if I go back and I had found my first husband or my second long-term relationship, who I became a fiance with, if I had found either of those men when I was who I was later in life, those relationships may have been the love of my life. Like, I don't want to say that those men were wrong or were not right for me. I was not right for anyone. And the key was realizing that I'm sure that there were many humans that crossed my path that could have been ideal and beautiful as loving partners for me, that I wasn't ready to accept that. So I said to this woman, I said, listen, she said, well, I did one plant medicine journey, wasn't with ayahuasca. She goes, I did one plant medicine journey and it was really tough on me. And I don't think it's right for me. I'm like, okay. I said, but you have to keep doing the work. Remember, my first plant medicine journey, I was in a ball, trying to remain and hold on to control, shivering and sweating because I didn't want to let go of control, that individual you experienced. And I needed to keep doing the work until I was finally manifested to the human that I could find love. And I still need to keep doing the work to keep the relationship strong. I need to keep doing the work to be a better leader. And I need to keep doing the work. So I mentioned to this woman, you know, she said she's checked a box and tried something. I said, no, you've got to keep working your ass off until the universe manifests, until the universe rewards you with all that you deserve, because you are already deserving of it. And you just have to keep doing the hard work to clean off and find that truth inside of you, that authenticity inside of you. And that's what's showing up, you know, to One Heart has been for me, you know, for multiple times for that very reason.
Yeah. One of the things that came up for me a little bit when you were speaking of that is something I often say towards the end of our journey is that we really don't use the word healing. I try not to use the word healing because I believe we're whole, perfect, and complete. And I think oftentimes we're on this constant search to be healed or for more healing. And when we're constantly looking to be healed, then we're by nature, not enough, not ready, not calling in those things in our lives.
What's the word you use instead of healing?
Well, elevation, which is a word we both tend to like, or expansion is sometimes even more accurate.
My mind went to one that maybe is an interesting one, but finding, because I agree that it's within us, it's already there. And it's, there's something when I'm working with a team and I talk to my research, I have a research institute of high performing teams. When I'm working with my research institute, when I'm working with my team, I say, we've got to engineer to gravity. Meaning we can't fight basic human nature. We've got to engineer to gravity. And the good news about the work we're doing, Brandon, is it is gravity. Meaning if we relax into who we are, we will find all that we are hoping for, right? And it's really relaxing into the essence of who we are at our core.
I guess where I would take that, the word I would use is actually choose. Is we choose when we're healed. And so, it's that moment. And any of us without ayahuasca, without any of this, anyone can choose that. It's not easy. Sometimes we need mental shifts. We need shifts in perspective, or we believe we do. But at the end of the day, it's the moment we choose. We say, I'm healed. I'm enough. I deserve this. And that's when our lives shift. That's when we call in the partners. That's when we call in some of these things in our lives that we do. And it's really that choice. So that's something that I focus on.
I love it. I think it's a good point. And by the way, it's, and the reason I would react to choice, particularly when I first met you, is because I don't think I had the tools to choose. I was too under it. I was too under the shit to be able to feel like I had a choice. And that's why I said to this woman and why I sent her to Tim is because she's got to keep showing up and doing the work. You got to keep doing the work. And the act of doing the work, you don't have to, without expectations almost, you keep doing the work. And the work is very manifest. I mean, it's breath work, it's medicine work, it's coaching and therapy, it's peer-to-peer vulnerability and sharing. And let's keep going down the list. It's just keep doing the work.
And hanging out with your family and your partner and all the daily tests.
Giving yourself joy, right? I mean, Brandon, you'll be proud of me. I went to Bali during the holidays with Kale.
I saw that.
And we took 3-week vacation, which I've never done in my life, ever. And I walked away from Bali saying, first of all, I'm buying a place there, no question. So you're welcome to come anytime. But I'm buying a place there, and I really feel called to work significantly less and make space for what is next for me. At my age, I'm far from done. But the question is, what is the world ready for me to do? And I love the work that we do, and I will continue to support the organization called Farazi Greenlight in whatever way that team, which now has a president, and hopefully that president will be graduating into a CEO. But none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for the work I've done with you and with One Heart. My ability to be prepared. And by the way, and I still fuck it up so badly. I'm about to have a board meeting this afternoon. And I've got to call board members and say, stop me from standing in the way of my current president's success. Because I am naturally ordained to periodically fall back into fear, which—
And you have the awareness of that. And that awareness of that is everything. And that's where
I know I can be aware of it while it's coming out of my damn mouth. I mean, it's a compulsion, as are so many things that we practice. I mean, look, so many people who may be listening to this, we are all addicts. An addict is an individual who has behaviors that are created to soften, to mollify, to escape, that actually are digging us deeper. Some people go to substances, other people go to sex, other people go to work, other people go to lots of things. They're just tapes that are played, and they're so horrifically damaging. And that's what I mean. It's the hard work. It's the hard work, because I have to still work hard to unbundle those from my life to show up in a way that I hope to continue to show up.
Yeah, I studied Kabbalah for many years. And one of the things that the main rabbi would say is, he'd say, don't ask for an easier life, ask for better tools. And I think that's really what I've discovered. And I try to convey to people, you don't come on these journeys, things aren't just going to be like easy. And all of a sudden you're going to be shown probably more challenges, because that's the way our souls elevate. That's the way we actually get further in this life. And that will expand the level of joy you have, because you're more open, and it may expand some of the pain and some of the other areas of your life, because you are not a numbed out, robot in the world anymore. And so things can become more challenging, and they become a lot more interesting, and you can do a lot more in this lifetime if that's a path that you choose.
And one of the things that I discovered in One Heart and through this journey is one of the great, I had already written a book about it. Who's Got Your Back?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote the book, Who's Got Your Back, after I wrote Never Eat Alone, all about building relationships that are authentic, building your network. And then when a book becomes hugely successful, the publisher wants another one within a year. It's funny because your first book takes you a lifetime to write, and then they want the second one in a year.
Yeah, on that.
And yeah, exactly. So the second one in a year, for me, it was saying, okay, if building a broad network is your path to success, what is your path to elevation? And I wrote a book that recognized that the three closest relationships in your life fundamentally define your ability to elevate. Mm-hmm. And yet, if I look back on my life, I never really let those three in, let alone those 15, people in my company, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And so it was through your work with you, that I started to become aware of a pattern that was needed for our elevation. And it had nothing to do with doing the hard work alone. It had to do with doing the hard work together. And it was actually during a week with One Heart that what came to me was a word that was one of the most powerful words that I could use to fundamentally describe how a group of individuals can lift each other up, how a group of individuals can sharpen each other's tools, can give each other candor, accountability, love, energy, well-being. And what came to me, what was given to me, was the word co-elevation.
Yeah.
And it just is such a perfect word to describe. And what came to me was how little I had of it, that my relationships were not co-elevating, that my teams were not co-elevating. I mean, I was going through, I had come up with all of the systems and all of the words, but not a single word that fully encapsulated what we all needed to live in our life. And so I thank you forever for that.
Yeah, thank you. We've borrowed that as well. And I remember, I think it was Journey 2, your first journey, that you asked to speak on it. It must have been the first speech on it. You're like, can I do an impromptu session? And I was still holding on to a lot of control at the time, and was like, no, I developed this perfect program. We can't go off. We can't go off. But fortunately, we allowed that to happen, and so many beautiful things happened. So many in that group, and since have got together for projects and life, and have so many meaningful relationships with each other. And one thing I tell people, we interview every person that comes on a journey. And one of the things I often talk about is really our community is as much the medicine as the medicine, the ayahuasca itself. And we see that time and time again, the way that this community, both the community, the people on their journey, and then the broader community support them, is so profound. To have these experiences, to go off to Peru and come back on your own and try to integrate this without that, it's almost hard to believe at this time. That community, the way our WhatsApp channels are active, the integration we do after the meetups, the way people become business partners and life partners and all kinds of things. And I think that element of, I think we had that intention going in, but you really helped us cement that both in the term. And then one thing I did want to talk to, and maybe we can segue to that, is you've come back, and you are, other than my two partners, you're the only one who's hosted these journeys with me. And those were special. I don't know. I think we did probably about maybe three of them together. And those are very special. There's a lot of vulnerability. There's a lot of things around kind of the conversations we have over lunch in particular with our elevation groups that really you drove some really deep themes through. So I just love to hear what drove you to want to be in service in that way with One Heart, and then how have you seen that evolve?
As I mentioned to you in that very first session, I mean, I've always, not only have I been a seeker, but I've always been a server. I mean, it's been part of my mechanism to grow and develop is to put myself out in front and say, okay, I want to serve, I want to help. And by doing that, you've got to live to it to some extent. And I found, by the way, plenty of my life, I didn't live to it as much as I would like, but nonetheless, always being willing to put yourself out there gives you the opportunity to continue to fine tune your own machine. So that's one. It is definitely selfish in that showing up and serving allowed me to continue to grow. But what was powerful for me is, I mean, just look at Tim. Tim became your business partner and my son. I mean, I remembered when
Mine
during
too. We can share them.
Yeah, you can share him. The world can share it. He's got a lot to share. And I remember one of the things that probably One Heart's given to me is family. As you know, I've tried in different ways to manifest family. First was through foster care. I joke that the gays are put on this planet to take care of the ones the straights don't. So I felt like instead of doing surrogacy, I want to be of service to kids in need. And so we went with foster care. And it was an amazing journey to foster children, trying to be of service to them. And after it all, it was so tumultuous and difficult and challenging and sometimes violent that they were uncovering so much of, I mean, imagine if I had things that covered my orb of brilliance and brightness. These poor kids have been in 21 homes. And I was like, wow, I'm so happy to have shown up the way I did, but I still am missing what my father got out of that relationship. And what I realized is looking around, I was able to find family, and I found it in the One Heart community, first with Tim and Jacobo and Michael and Jack, my sons, who have been as important in my life as I believe as they share, I've been in theirs. And that creation of something, that family creation, I'll be forever grateful. And, we talked about Kale and the love of my life and the ability to show up in that way, but the ability to show up, paternalistically as well. I mean, you've just become a father. And
my first podcast since fatherhood.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, you look pretty good. You don't look too sleep deprived, but the point is that, like, imagine what a father you are today versus what you would have been 10 years ago. Not to suggest that you would have been a poor father. We all are, we all muddle through it. And I think about that as well. My poor foster kids, they had a father who wasn't as evolved as he is today. And, that's one of the other reasons why to do this hard work, not only for ourselves, not only for our hearts and our love, but for those that we love, right? Yeah. Showing up in the best self for those we love. That should be a constant pursuit. Look, I mean, I was reading something recently. I'm writing a new book, just starting in the early, writing 2 new books right now.
So the type A is not gone yet.
No, that's not gone. Well, that's just, by the way, good that you say that, because the thing that I was afraid of in college, that I would lose my edge, it's just been the opposite. I found my sweet spot. There's a difference. I might have actually lost some of my edge, but I found my sweet spot.
I was going to ask you a question about that, because I find there's a lot of people with concerns that, hey, they're going to come on this and they're just going to want to be a yoga teacher and sit on a mountain. And, what really happens is it shakes away the stuff that is just out of alignment, and we start to get in alignment. And one of the things I find interesting about you is just, you are still very deeply in, let's call it the matrix. You're very much in corporate America, dealing with these big, huge businesses. I don't know that, I came from that world. I did that in New York. I was in advertising and tech and meeting with all those companies. I don't know that I could still have those conversations myself. And I look at you and I see how you're supporting them, and it's baby steps for many of them. They're not all going and doing ayahuasca, but I see how you've been able to take this work you're doing and bring that into corporations, bring that into books that are read by the masses and by the business world. And I find it very interesting how you've been able to do that.
Probably the biggest shift that's happened is I had created a company that supported my efforts. And what's opened up fractionally, not fully, what's opened up is the chance that I've maybe created an institution that can perpetuate its service to the world. Now I've got 8 partners. I've got 8 people who can deliver this work in addition to myself.
Yeah. I remember on that first journey, you were like, I can't trust anyone. It was like no one else. You had no one else to support you. You're like, it's amazing to hear you have 8.
I mean, I had a company, but I didn't have a group of individuals that I could, as you said, trust to do the work. So by virtue of that, what's happening for me is I'm shifting my ability to serve my people. And then my question will be, first of all, there's a big part of me that just wants to be available for my love. Like I want to be available for the person that I'm in love with. And that's not something that I had ever prioritized in the past. But I'm finding that I'm having inklings of ideas that I could spend time with, that might be very different than what I've done, that would allow me to serve the world in a way that is new and opened up. And so that's very exciting to me. I think I should write more. I mean, written 5 books, but I do believe that one of my real superpowers is to manifest methodology, is to see things that many people think of as artistry, like networking, and turn them into a cogent and clear methodology that somebody can practice. To see things like a well-oiled and incredibly blessed team and turn that into a methodology for co-elevation of a team, right? So I'm really good at that. And I feel like there's a lot of things in this world that are artistry today that need more clarity and brought into the world and manifested in much more distinct process. So that I think I'd like to spend more time doing.
Yeah. What's a good example? I mean, I'd love to dive just a little bit deeper into your work now. And I'm curious, like how you were able to bring back I think co-elevation is obviously a big one, but I know you've led turnarounds for US Steel and working with GM and C-levels of the largest companies. What have you been most surprised maybe that you've been able to communicate to them and to get them to a level? I know you work a lot with vulnerability, and what concepts that you internalize through medicine, through your own work, have you really been able to capture and bring to these companies? I'm personally looking for some optimism in what's coming through to these large companies.
First of all, within one session of working with an executive team of a significant company, I know I can crack the code of what I call hope and possibility. So we walk into a room of people that we've been working with for years, and we have what I call a social contract with them. One social contract is, in the worst case, these are my competitors. I don't see that very often, to be honest with you. I was just in Davos at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting, and people are always talking about what business needs to do differently. And I just paused, and I was at the New York Times dinner with a group of CEOs and NGOs and government leaders. And I paused, and Andrew Sorkin asked me if I would speak. And I said, listen, would you all point the finger, particularly the NGOs, at business? Let me explain to you how I hear that. There's 8 to 15 wonderful souls that right now are struggling between how they prioritize their time with a war in Ukraine and broken supply chains and diversity inclusion in their organizations and mental health of their people and a downturn of the economy. And I just went through 20 different things that these people, who people call business, who people are pointing their fingers at and saying, you have to change. You have to do different. And I said to them, listen, I don't trust government to be the solution.
Mm.
I mean, if you look at, if one end of the extreme of function and dysfunction, business is a damn load more functional than our governments are today. And therefore, one asks oneself, where will we find a transformation of the world? And I know where you feel it's going to be found, and it's through entrepreneurs personally awakening. But where I know it can be found faster is if those 8 to 15 people find in each other a different path and a different social contract. And they find the time to curate different priorities. And they have. The pandemic was a massive inflection point that allowed us to awaken to mental health being an important area. And as a result, there are corporations awakening to utilizing legalized psychedelics. Mind you, they're not my protocol of choice like ketamine and others, but they're utilizing psychedelics as a benefit for corporations to find mental health. So I do believe that it is through the utilization of these 8 to 15 souls called business, called an executive team, that we can find windows of awakening that could end up supporting the war in Ukraine and making sure that people are free, that could end up bringing mental health benefits like One Heart into corporations and paid for. And I know that that's the journey I'm on. The journey I'm on, and hopefully it's the glimmer of hope that you're looking for, is someone's got to fight that fight and help these organizations. They're not organizations. They're just beautiful souls struggling to sort among the priorities.
Yeah. I mean, the people absolutely are part of humanity. And, they're, I guess the question is the system. And I wonder, how do you sell it to the board and to the stock, the stock exchanges and the things that unfortunately drive
You don't have to,
decision making?
but you don't have to. You really just have to sell it to the tipping point of one individual in the group of 18 who can be an evangelist for building a strong or simple movement inside of the executive team. And then you end up with an organization like Patagonia that says, hey, shareholders, let me explain to you what you're investing in if you invest in us. We are not maximizing for your financial success. We're maximizing for the planet. And by the way, by doing that, they crush their performance. They're doing a beautiful job. So, I don't, once we start institutionalizing and fantasizing about Borg or the Matrix, we lose sight of the tipping point of opportunity, which is the individual, and then the tribe and the co-elevation of a partnership. Once we can go there, we get transformation.
Beautiful. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. I mean, maybe I would love to just hear, I think you've eloquently, you've referred so many people to us, which I thank you for, and you so eloquently describe the One Heart experience so often. I would just love to hear from your words, if there's someone out there considering joining us on a One Heart journey, why would you recommend they do so?
If you've gotten this far in this podcast, you've already been called. And so, like I said, I showed up wanting the particular plant medicine called ayahuasca because I had heard whatever I had heard about it. I thought it was going to be this panacea, this key that got turned and life would be changed. I thought it would be a really tough journey and I was ready for it. And then I found that I wasn't until I was. And the journey will call you. It really will. But what I do recommend is that you have a conversation with one of these beautiful agents of change, whether it's Brandon Barry or Tim or whoever, that can begin to have you understand what the journey is about. And it'll speak to you. It'll call you clearly. It won't be a question. You'll be frightened. You'll be worried. You may be doubtful, but you'll be clear. And it's right there for you. And one news is this medicine has been around for thousands of years, and it will be around, and its resonance is stronger than it ever has been. And with efforts of Brandon's and others in making sure that the preservation of the integrity, one of the things I love about Brandon's work is it's not commercialized. In fact, he at the same time, while trying to bring appropriate scale at the same time is constantly fighting for the preservation of the essence of the journey and its historical essence, its sustainability and its rituals. So I love that balance as we bring it to scale. It's not something we should be popping. I don't believe it's something we should be popping in a pill, on a weekend randomly, which I know other people feel that's possible. But anyway, all of that said, my only recommendation is give these guys a call and co-create when your next step is in that right direction. Because if you're watching this far, you know you'll get there.
I'm
All
very
right.
grateful for you, brother. I know how hard it is to get on your schedule sometimes and appreciate the time, but love you and send my love to Cal as well.
Thank you, Brandon. Love you.
We are very grateful to our guests for sharing their stories of transformation with One Heart, and we hope their wisdom will support you in your life journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss out. If you're a heart-centered leader or conscious creator who's ready to level up your life and impact in the world, we humbly invite you to apply to our next One Heart journey. One Heart was created to support leaders like you to live and lead from a place of true alignment, fulfillment, and joy. Our 8-week Human Life Accelerator is built around a 1-week journey to Costa Rica with sacred psychedelic plant medicine and a world-class experience that blends many ancient and modern modalities for growth. Before and after this journey, we help you prepare and integrate all your breakthroughs with our 5-star experience. Over 500 amazing leaders have joined One Heart on our journeys over the past 4 years. If you'd like to apply to join our next journey, head over to oneheart.com. That's the number 1, HEART.com to apply. Till next time.